right. Good morning and welcome to the Haven Tree Parent Podcast, where we get a chance to get together and talk about something that's important to us and to you, hopefully, before the kids pick up.
Today, again, we don't have a special guest, but we are starting a new series that I'm really excited about. So today we're going to be talking about co-sleeping, particularly as it relates to other cultures and countries around the world. We have a special guest. I guess I lied. You can hear Punsy in the background. She doesn't want to be participating, though. She's on the bed on the floor, and she's really working hard to make it comfortable right now.
Got to get all the scratches out. this
Somebody else apparently laid there and made it lumpy for her.
Definitely the cat. All right. So like she said, we're going to talk about co-sleeping today. And just a quick introduction about it. When co-sleeping was first introduced to the community or to, I don't know, the population or society or whatever you want to talk about it, came with a really broad term of what does co-sleeping even stand for or mean. Some people thought that it meant sharing a room, and so the baby would be in the crib in the corner away from the bed. And other people thought that it was actually supposed to co-sleep with yourself in the bed, which caused a lot of problems. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because it's a multicultural issue or just differences.
Yeah, and I think that one of the importances, or one of the reasons it's important to point that out, is because, you know, historically, researchers used that term co-sleeping to describe a lot of different things. And so as much as possible today, when we're talking about it, we're going to differentiate between room sharing, which would be like having the baby in a bassinet or a portable crib or even, you know, a full-size crib in the same room as parents, and bed sharing, which is obviously sleeping in a bed together or a bed surface. Because obviously some cultures sleep on mats or on the ground. And so sharing sort of the bed space.
I think I slept on the ground until I was like 19 or something. Pretty much. I never slept on my bed when I grew up, because it was just like, I could get an extra 10 minutes of sleep because Dad would wake up, come into my room and wake me up. But if I slept downstairs on the floor under the piano, perfect.
Under the piano.
Yeah, it was out of the way so nobody would kick me in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
so.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I think the other sort of disclaimer or thing that's really important to talk about right off the bat is that this is not meant to be advocating for bed sharing or co-sleeping. I think it's really important to note that SIDS is a real and awful thing, you know.
Right.
The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that babies sleep alone on their back in a crib. You know, like 3,600 babies die yearly from sudden infant death.
I think every parent worries about it there for the first however much time that span usually is. So
well, and it's, you know, it's something that's horrifying to even think about, that you would, you know, go to bed with a healthy baby and wake up without one.
Right.
I can't even fathom that experience, and potentially not ever having real answers about what happened. You know, and you will hear stories about, you know, moms who left the baby at daycare, and, you know, when the babysitter went to get the baby up from nap, the baby was gone, you know, or whatever. So I think it's really important just to kind of like start right off the bat by saying, what we're talking about today, we're really looking at from a sort of anthropological perspective, where we're looking at what other cultures do and why, and what benefits researchers find in that compared to what we do. Because I think it's really interesting to see and learn different perspectives. And I think it's especially curious some of the other topics that we are going to look at in this series I'm really excited about. So I think that this one is a subject that can be touchy, and there's an inherent risk obviously associated with it.
Right. Yeah. We're talking about, you know, that an edgy side of raising a child from you know, the early days.
Yeah. So I just think that that's kind of important to start right off the bat with. We will try to include all of the links to all the resources that we used in the description.
She used a lot, so you have everything.
But right at the top of that is going to be the AAP's recommendations on safe sleep and what that looks like. That'll be the first one there, because I think that it is really important to just kind of start off the conversation of co-sleeping or bed sharing with that. And I think at the top of the, risk pool of co-sleeping arrangements would be sharing a couch or a chair. Both of those, the risks are extremely high for a baby to roll off of a parent, roll onto the floor, get covered by a pillow, roll into a crack. And there's not really any argument for that in any setting. And so it's something that, as parents that aren't getting much sleep with a new baby, it is something to be
You're just like, wherever I'm comfortable, wherever he's comfortable,
right.
he's comfortable, right. I will sleep there.
But that is, I think, the biggest, highest risk of infant death. And it has been scientifically proven
to It's just because your own alertness level is down. So.
And it's just not a safe place. You're not flat somewhere. So
yeah. And then there's so many devices and things that people, recommend, and then it's just like you're throwing more stuff around the baby.
Well, and then the other thing too that I think is important to talk about, and I think that the AAP link that I used has a link right in it to product recalls and stuff. But like when Obi was a baby, we really liked the Fisher Price sort of inclined rocker bassinet situation. Because it was easy to move around. And so I would just kind of move it around the house. And if he napped, during the day, I could put him in that and he would be close by. But I could just set him down easily. Mm-hmm. And then those were recalled because babies were falling out of them and rolling over. Because they were inclined, there were all sorts of issues. So they recalled them. And I just remember that being a big deal, like when Obi was a baby. So I think the other thing, obviously, that's important, as we kind of talk about the issue, is thinking about different devices and things that babies might sleep in and whether or not those are safe. So, like I said, one of the ones that I like to use was, suddenly there were a lot of issues with it or things happened. So
here's my idea. Get a trampoline. Put it in their room. They just go to the middle of the trampoline because you can't move out of that position. And even if you roll over, it's still like mesh, so you just breathe through that.
I don't think we should recommend that. Thank you for your ideas.
It was just a crazy idea.
Anyway, okay, so with all the disclaimers and introductions and all of that out of the way, we can kind of jump into the actual topic at hand.
Yeah, sorry for my random.
It's part of Josh. So co-sleeping is something that is very common in other parts of the world. I don't think that that's really questioned. But it was definitely very interesting as I kind of looked at some of the perspectives or input from people of other cultures. One of the really interesting things is, a lot of parents in other cultures perceive it as a responsibility, as a way of bonding. And, there was one researcher that talked about doing a study. I have to look here. She was doing field work in Australia and happened to be with a family that lived there, and a movie came on that showed the parent putting the baby to bed in the crib in the nursery, and the native Aboriginal grandmother was really kind of horrified by that and thought, what kind of parent would make the baby sleep by themselves in a separate room? Excuse me. Which I find to be, I found it to be comical, but I think also really enlightening as to kind of the perspective of why parents in other cultures choose that. I think, initially I was sort of envisioning and this is a terrible, not stereotype necessarily, but assumption of like, oh, in cultures in Africa where they live in huts or small dwellings, they may sleep on the floor, and of course the baby's going to sleep next to the mother because the whole family is sort of sleeping together. And that is factual. There are tribes in Central and South America, in Africa, and other areas where the family does sleep on the floor, or even in some south, what's my direction? Southeastern Asian countries where they sleep on maps. I'm map challenged. I can't help it. But where they sleep on mats on the floor, and so in those instances, of course, the infant is going to be sleeping with the mom, and they're not going to have like a separate baby mat separate from the parent in those situations. But it's not just born out of necessity or out of like, this is just what we do and what we've always done. There are some parenting ideas that are very attached to the idea of sharing a sleeping space, bed sharing. Another culture that I found a lot of research about was talking about Korea, and the fact that sort of the idea of civic duty and like sort of a collectivism is very important culturally. And so sleep, bed sharing is kind of a natural part of instilling that idea of togetherness and I don't know, sort of fostering the strength of the family from the very beginning, that when a baby's born, it sleeps with the parents and the family sleeps together. And I find it to be very interesting that that's sort of a parenting choice and sort of an intentionally done. This is a value of our family, of our culture, and we start instilling this and teaching this to our kids from the very first day of their life, which I think is really cool. Mm-hmm. You look like you were going to say something.
Sorry, I have no thoughts on that one.
So something else that was pointed out. So I have to apologize. Obviously, I get to do most of the talking today because Josh did not do his required research. It's like the group project where one person does all the work. And I think that that's academically a very good description of who we were in school too. Probably that was the overachiever that did it all if my partner was slacking. And Josh sort of waited till the last minute and hoped the partner did the work, right?
I'm not hoping you do the work. I'm just hoping for good things that I can comment. But I don't want to be rude about the ideas of what people are doing in different cultures. Like I appreciate the aspects of just how they present co-sleeping and how they do their country's thing. I just, I find it fascinating, and there's not much I can really comment on saying, ooh, that's fascinating, because I think everybody's saying that along with you as they listen.
So on the topic of SIDS, in other cultures, one of the things that a couple of different articles mentioned was the fact that Hong Kong and Japan both, co-sleeping, bed sharing in particular, is extremely common, and they have some of the lowest rates of SIDS in the world. However, in Japan specifically, one of the reasons or one of sort of the like asterisks was that maternal smoking rates are nearly zero. And so as bed sharing increases, breastfeeding increases, and maternal smoking rates have decreased. And so sort of the hypothesis is, because breast milk is so full of amazing, wonderful nutrients for baby, and because bed sharing is encouraging moms to breastfeed longer because it enables them to do so easily at night and still get sleep, it's actually creating healthier, stronger babies who hit developmental milestones more rapidly and grow and thrive better. And so, that sort of is the theory, I guess, of why in particular the SIDS rate in Japan is so low. And similarly in Hong Kong, I think the article I read kind of pointed to similar factors. So, and I think that's a good time to bring up. Every time that co-sleeping or bed sharing was mentioned in other cultures, it was sort of assumed that it was co-sleeping, bed sharing, and breastfeeding, and those two topics sort of went hand in hand across the board for other cultures. And so I think that that's really important to kind of point out that, it just is sort of assumed that if you're sharing a bed, the reason that you're sharing a bed is because you're breastfeeding, right?
Yeah, because once you're on a bottle, I mean, why would you rather be in the same room? Like,
well, I mean, I think that there's still benefits of sharing a room, even if you were formula feeding. And we'll talk about that some, but the American Academy of Pediatrics does point to several studies now that talk about...
Well, I don't mean even formula feeding. I mean, you can still pump and,
sure,
give a bottle. So.
That is true. I know people that do that, but I can't imagine it. And we'll talk about breastfeeding another day because that's a whole different situation and issue. But, I do think when you're talking about co-sleeping in babies, it's with the assumption that you're breastfeeding in conjunction with bed sharing. And that's sort of unquestioned. I lost my train of thought though, because that was sort of off the beaten path.
Sorry.
So one of the other things just kind of that I thought was interesting, a different researcher was talking to mothers in a tribe in Kenya, and they asked about babies sleeping through the night. And the moms were all very confused. Like, why would babies wake up? Like, of course they sleep during the night. Like, and so this idea of like babies waking during the night was something that like culturally was just not even talked about, thought about, experienced. Like they had no sort of frame of reference for that, because they were so accustomed to sleeping alongside their babies and breastfeeding during sleep, and that was just a very normal part of their parenting experience. And so again, just kind of like how different, because it's something that I always see, like the conversation of like, how do you get your baby to sleep at night, and like, do you do cry it out or do you not? Do you do gentle sleep training? And there's like, hundreds of books written about how to get your baby to sleep, but then like to recognize that that's such a cultural thing that has to do with some of the other choices and parenting decisions that we make. I do think it's very interesting to see that difference.
Yeah, I agree. There's probably like people get messed up because they're trying to do what they see versus what they, just naturally want to do or something. Right. So,
and obviously
there's an instinct there that you have to weigh out with, oh, well, culturally, I should be doing this. And
right.
instinctively, I know I want to do this instead.
Yeah. And there's lots of sort of evidence that suggests like, oh, well, evolutionarily or biologically, all of our ancestors co-slept in bed and bed shared because that was what they did. And so, it's a very Western idea to have your baby sleep in a separate bed or in a separate room.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of like cultural reasons for that. I came across a lot of really interesting stuff about sleep evolution and kind of some of the different things about how, like at one point, like even married people sleeping in the same bed was considered like totally ridiculous because there was like theories about like stealing sleep energies from your spouse and like, and then, like it became very natural to sleep together. And then like in the 1890s, twin beds became popular, and like pastors and clergy members spoke out against twin beds because it was going to cause problems for the marital relationship for couples to suddenly sleep apart. And so, there's kind of been this ebb and flow of, no, we don't sleep apart. Yes, we do. Like that has kind of, it has a very, trend what? Like it just is kind of like whatever's new, we kind of then consider that normal. And so it just is very interesting that is something that I think is important to consider too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you did any research on the history of when putting a baby in its own room was even started. Like my theory is, and this is crazy, Josh thought, but I was just thinking like it was Victorian era type style thinking.
So there is some,
because that's when like all the strollers were all fancified.
Well, yeah. So obviously Josh is much more excited about history than I am.
Well,
so, you know, there was some talk about like the ideas of like houses and how they sort of evolved and how that impacted the sleeping arrangement. So, you know, during the times when homes had fireplaces for heating, often the babies would sleep in parents' rooms because you didn't want to have a fire going in a separate room with just the infant by itself. And then that kind of evolved, and as different types of heating and different types of...
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You
know.
Can jump ahead now because I think everybody can logically follow along. Oh,
Well,
okay. Central air conditioning is now brought
right.
up to
So,
this
but
point,
then like there's also like conversation about carpets and like the fact that like carpets played a role in that as well because they naturally contain more dust. And so then there was sort of a cultural or trend shift again based on that. And so I think there's lots of factors that come into play that I had never considered until I started doing research, but it's definitely not something that we can unfortunately talk about all the specific points. It could be, you know, then co-sleeping
Sorry,
could be
you already have so much, and I'm asking for more information. Well, let's just make this podcast 45 minutes.
You know. Yeah. So from there, I think, you know, the natural sort of then step is to talk about what researchers suggest are some of the pros of co-sleeping or bed sharing. And there were a couple of these that I actually found pretty interesting. One we've kind of already mentioned, which is it supports breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is difficult. At least it was for me every single time. It's been very hard. It's best for baby, but you know, not everybody's able to for different reasons. And so there is an aspect of having the baby in the bed with you allows parents to get sleep at night. And there is research that demonstrates that bed sharing is often correlated with longer span of breastfeeding. So,
you mean like going for 10 months instead of like 3 months or something?
Yeah. So, and obviously, you know, the AAP recommends that babies be breastfed for the first 12 months. We've never made it to 12 months with any of our kids.
They're still beefy.
We have big, healthy farm kids. But, you know, like that is the recommendation. And research strongly supports the fact that bed sharing and higher rates of breastfeeding for longer go hand in hand. One of the other really interesting ones that I found is there's a lot of different research that talked about physiologic synchronization for moms and babies that bed shared. So basically the most simple explanation for this is that moms and babies were sort of in sync when they slept while they were breastfeeding, when they slept sort of facing each other. So
when they say that's true for like when the baby's born, you want to do skin to skin contact,
right,
because that like you sync up with heartbeats and temperature and all those things.
So,
bonding, whatever you call it.
So that, and that's a great point that I hadn't thought about.
Okay.
That sort of regulation extends, or the theory is that sort of regulation extends even to some extent when mom and baby are sleeping together. So lots of sleep studies have been done that measure the mom's sleep cycle and the baby's sleep cycle. And a lot of that demonstrates that moms sort of enter the same sleep cycle at the same time as babies and are able then to respond to their, you know, sort of waking cues or rooting cues to relatch to the breast or whatever. Similarly,
I was gonna say, even now, like with Kenzie over the last year of her treatment and getting chemo and all that stuff, what you guys sleep the best when she comes in and like is like, Mama,
Oh,
I need
yeah.
snuggles. And
Oh,
like
yeah.
as soon as you guys are like together and you're both tired, because if she's
Yeah.
not tired, then it's just a continuous conversation.
Yeah.
But when they're both tired and they're like just snuggled up together, like they're both just like perfect sleep. It's like
It's so
you
true.
know it's deep, like the deepest REM sleep they're gonna
It's
get. But they're
so
so
true.
like just cuddled together because
Yeah.
you know Kenzie loves Mama and her mama is like, oh, my baby is here, I'm taking
Yeah.
care of her, and
Yeah.
that same little connection thing happens.
And we've never,
And she's 4, but you know
we've
so
never,
there's no risk there.
like
But
done that. Like Kenzie went through a phase where she had to sleep with us every night, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
was a little bit difficult.
well, I think once we brought her home from the hospital, we were
Yeah,
like, you
it
sleep
was
in our
difficult.
room, you sleep on our couch, because we had a little chair
yeah,
in there that she
yeah.
would roll in.
So, but that's very true. Like there have definitely been times where I like am tossing and turning and I can't fall asleep, and then Kenzie will come in and she'll be like, I had a bad dream, and I'm like, oh, come snuggle,
Perfect.
and I'm like asleep in 5 seconds. You know,
Yeah, they're both out. And I'm like,
So-
I'm just gonna walk away, be quiet.
So there is sort of that aspect that, and you know, obviously, like you said, that's a little bit different because she's older. She's not an infant.
Right.
And
And you know the need there, and I think it's just comforting because
Yeah.
you have each other.
yeah,
So.
and I think that you know is a very unique to Kenzie's sort of situation at this point in our
Yeah.
life. But we have had the other kids. Like Cy went through a phase where he had bad dreams, like nightly,
Right,
and he
yeah.
was coming into our room almost every night and ended up sleeping in our bed half the night. Or you know, Adria went through a phase too, where she for like a couple
I don't
of weeks.
think she would come out of her bed, but I would go to her room, or we would go to her
Yeah,
room. So if
yeah.
it was me or you, one of us would go over there.
So there have been stages in our parenting where like we've allowed the kids to come and sleep with us, but it isn't for us. It's not ever been something that we try to encourage. We're not a family that does like the family bed or anything like that. But
Yeah,
but at
we
the
do
same
like
point,
family movie night in our room, and
Yeah.
the kids love it because they're like
Yeah,
pillows
they'll
are on the
snuggle
floor.
and-
Yeah, I'll lay on the floor, and they'll just
Yeah.
crawl on top of me or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But you know, we very much encourage them to have their own beds to sleep in. But they also know, like, if they need anything, they come and get in bed with us, and it's not an issue. As long as the only negative to that is if I wake up covered in pee, I am not happy. Like that is the one part.
Yeah.
That is like.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's kind of nice. You wake up in the morning, like Josh has gone to work, but I still have like a warm little body snuggling me. It's wonderful. It's a great way to wake up.
Right.
But back to some scientific pros of co-sleeping. One of the other things that's interesting is they talked about the fact that as they were studying sleep bed sharing, mom and baby actually have more frequent waking. So some evidence suggested that may lead to higher rates of depression in mom. Conversely, though, they suggest that the benefit of that is obviously that mom is able to check in on baby more frequently and make sure that she's not sleeping too deeply or baby's not sleeping too deeply, and is sort of getting the needs met more efficiently. And I think the other interesting thing is there are lots of even American associations that do encourage some form of bed sharing or co-sleeping, which is really, I wasn't aware of that. So I think even in the scientific community in our country, there is sort of some disagreement on where that line is necessarily. Obviously, you know, with bed sharing and co-sleeping, one of the biggest concerns is the baby going to be in bed with us forever, you know, or how do moms and dads have mom and dad time if there's babies in the bed?
Right. Yeah. I think I follow like 3 dads groups or whatever, and on Facebook, and one of the dads, again, like it's like every week there's a new question, like, when do the kids leave your room? And everybody's like, either between 4 and 7 months, sometime between there.
Yeah.
You know, and other people gave various answers, like, you
Yeah.
know, the second day they're home, you know.
Yeah.
So.
And some of the arguments, you know, to that, you know, are like, so again, kind of pointing at Japanese culture. In Japanese culture, it's actually very common for even up to teenage years to co-sleep or to sleep in a family bed. But then, you know, cultural studies also talk about how independent and socially responsible Japanese kids and teens are. And so there's some theory that because bed sharing and snuggling and togetherness is sort of a foundation of home life, then children feel more confident to be independent or make choices and be responsible.
Yeah.
So there's kind of some give and take there. I think, obviously, like I said, when Kenzie was sleeping in our bed every night, it was a little bit difficult. We kind of got to a point of like, I just want her to sleep in her own bed one night. And so, so there was.
Well, and then she'd be on steroids for a week, and
Yeah.
then we'd have.
And then she would never sleep. So there is some give and take there that I think is challenging, and I think you have to kind of figure out within your own family dynamics what work.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that's really important to talk about just a little bit, and we kind of hit on this already, but I think that if you are considering in any way, shape, or form bed sharing, co-sleeping, things like that, there are some recommendations for being safer about it. And I think a lot of them are common sense, but I think it's still important to talk about. One of the most important, obviously, is, as I said, people, when you talk about the benefits of bed sharing, every single time that's referenced in science, it's with the understanding that you're also breastfeeding. Like I said, I know breastfeeding is really difficult. And it's not something that everyone's able to do for different reasons. There could be hormonal issues, or, a child that's adopted, or, a baby that was a preemie and had a bad latch. I mean, there's 100 different reasons why breastfeeding is difficult. However, if your baby is formula fed, breastfeeding may not be, or if your child is formula fed, bed sharing is sort of like automatically assumed to be not something that's going to be safe or recommended, because the physiologic benefits of having sleep cycles that are similar and things like that sort of go out the window.
Yeah, because the formula is just going to break down differently.
Right. Well, and because you're not having that physiologic connection and bond that's established through breastfeeding. Now, obviously, feeding your baby is kind of the most important. So it's not, something to feel badly about if you're not able to breastfeed. But it is, I think, just really important to say, like, right off the bat, if you're not breastfeeding, then it's really not something that any of those benefits are going to apply to you then.
Yeah, so you're still going to get your connection regularly during the day.
Yeah.
So.
Similarly, the expectation is that it's a safe, healthy, full-term baby, not a preemie, not an infant.
Sure,
that
yeah.
has...
I mean, follow the guidance you're given for your specific,
right.
child. So
right, not a baby that has, chronic illnesses or heart defect or anything else like that, because again, those things are going to negatively impact.
Seek counsel.
Right. And pretty much any pediatrician that you talk to is going to recommend the baby sleeps alone on back in a crib. Like, whether or not that's in your room or not, you're really unlikely to find a pediatrician that encourages bed sharing in any form. And I don't think we're here to encourage that either. But I think that it is important to kind of highlight a couple of those things that sort of make it initially a no-go. The other big one is, and we've talked about it a little bit already, smoking or any other, alcohol or any sleep aids or any other
sleep aids, yeah.
any other drugs or anything like that that may impact your sleep. It's not safe to sleep with the baby. Smoking is known to increase the risk of SIDS. Being exposed to secondhand and thirdhand and any kind of smoke is known to increase the risk of SIDS for a baby. And obviously, if mom or dad is under the influence of anything, it's not going to be safe to sleep with baby. So I think that's...
have a plan, Yeah,
so. I think that's just something to keep in mind. And then obviously, sleeping on a bed, not having lots of pillows, not having pajamas or jewelry or anything else has strings on it, keeping baby in the middle of the bed, not on the edge, keeping pets and siblings and things like that out of the bed. Like, there's all sorts of, like, if you're going to do this, there are ways to increase the safety. At the end of the day, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. Like I said, I think there are lots of factors in play that lots of scientists are looking at, trying to figure out how it works in other cultures. But is risky in our culture. But at the end of the day, I think, if your child ends up being one of the 3,600 that, comes a stat of a child that died from SIDS, it's not going to matter if you followed all of the safe bed sharing recommendations.
Right.
And so I think that it's just really important that
be careful.
Yeah, that you be careful and you be wise.
Yeah.
And you listen to the advice of doctors and physicians,
and
people that are smarter than us.
And your instincts. So
yeah. But at the same point, I think, as we said from the beginning, it's pretty interesting to hear what other cultures do and kind of understand some of the rationale as to why. It just is very curious to me. So.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I said it's all fascinating. I just wanted to listen to all the things you researched. So.
Anyway, I'm sure everybody's tired of listening to Mostly Me talk, and I think it's probably about time for the kids to wake up. So I think we ought to wrap this up.
All right. Make sure you follow us, like, subscribe, do all those things, and we will catch you on the next adventure.
Bye.
Bye.